Yes. So, the aims of my presentation is to examine the history of Ajami manuscript culture in Mozambique and to describe the social role of Ajami manuscript culture as a cultural heritage of Islam, of Muslim and communities in Mozambique, and through that, as part of the complex puzzles of Mozambican identity. So this paper is based on archival research, field work, and literature review. And the main argument is that Ajami manuscript culture, as well as Ajami manuscripts, are theoretically protected under the Decree 1888 of 22 of December, but in practice they are marginalized and thus abandoned. And I have to add that in risk of extinction in Mozambique. So concerning the background of the arrival of introduction of Ajami manuscript culture in Mozambique, it's important to say that without the diffusion of Islam and Islamic education, it would not be possible. And in this sense, we have to highlight or remember, because I think that's all we know, that Mozambique was part of the Indian Ocean trade networks even before the Islam was revealed. And after Islam, Islam followed the trade networks to East Africa, to Mozambique, and to overall Southern African region. But it's also important to highlight the three-phase stages of expansion of Islam in East Africa and Mozambique particularly. The stage of quarantine Islam, the stage of court Islam, and the stage of popular Islam according to theories of Spencer Trimingham. Why am I bringing these stages? Because during the stage of quarantine Islam, the Muslim traders were confined in their coastal entrepot. And in the second stage, during the court Islam, so African rulers accepted Islam and they became Muslims, and they also transmitted Islam to their families, but they were not spreading it to the communities. And in this stage, education, Islamic education, was confined to this elite political, trade, and scholarly elites in the Indian, Western Indian Ocean networks. So in the stage of popular Islam through Tariqa mainly, Islam was taken to the mass, including to the hinterland, and so the Islamic education. This is important because it was a phase that Ajami manuscripts were spread in northern Mozambique from the Swahili networks. So the language is concerning the languages of the manuscripts in Mozambique, Ajami manuscripts. As you can see, we have Kiswahili, Ekoti, Kimwani, Shimakonde, Emako, and Portuguese. This Ajami manuscript culture was very active since its popularization in 19th century and was very active from this era until 1990s. But it's currently ostracized and marginalized by the new ulama with a discourse of innovations and impacted by the change within the system of Islamic education, the arrival of new technologies. Well, the system of Islamic education and its transformation, I think our colleagues in the previous panel have approached it. The system is almost the same. I would like just to add that in Mozambique, in northern Mozambique mainly, the system that we were presented in previous panel of that used the law or the wooden tablet was transformed into so-called modern system of Islamic education using books and blackboards. And according to local scholars, Islamic scholars in northern Mozambique, this transformation from traditional Kione or Chuo, as it was said, to the so-called modern Islamic education impacted negatively the system of transmission of this manuscript culture, the Ajami manuscript culture, in different ways. Oh, yes. Well, I would like also to say something about the types, typology and genre of and meanings of Ajami manuscript in northern Mozambique. So to say that we have secular and religious manuscripts comprehending different genres such as poems, we mean tenzi poem, shairi, nyimbo, and kasida. And we also have prose, for instance, letter correspondence and what's locally named as Nasaba, which mainly the history of local communities and genealogies. Ajami manuscripts are important source and expression of Mozambican Islamic identity, which is part of what we are trying to build as a national identity. As samples of Ajami manuscript from northern Mozambique, we have here on my left, or I guess on your left too, a letter correspondence, and this is from the Mozambique National Archives, or Archives de Mozambique. And then we have on the right letter correspondence from private archives in Nangosh. This one was from Nangosh. Well, just to say, both are in Kiswahili. And we also have Tenzi poetry. And on the left, we have Utenzi wa Kaisari, which tells about the impact of World War I in northern Mozambique. And then we have on the right, Utenzi wa Kupula, which was composed in Angosh by Sheikh Yusuf bin Noura, and it tells about the resistance of the Angoshians and the Makua people against the Portuguese colonial occupation. We also have a Kasida in Emakwa on the left, and then Utenzi wa Nazachina, Utenzi wa Kutawafu Nabi, which is the most popular among the Tenzi literature of let's say, religious Tenzi literature in northern Mozambique. So the challenge of safeguarding Ajami manuscripts are so many. First of all is the impact of discourse of modernity within the class of new ulamas in Mozambique. And this impacts negatively because they preach against the use of certain types of Ajami manuscripts. For instance, the performance of Tenzi poetry, the use of local composed kasidas in certain ceremonies, and so on, but also the arrival of new technologies who impacted negatively, mainly with this system of performance of Tenzi poetry, in the sense that in certain ceremonies where these texts and manuscripts were used, now they are not used because there are alternatives, technological alternatives for these events. Thank you. But also our environment and our architecture of housing and the way people are housing the manuscripts. But most of all, it's the lack of awareness of the importance of the manuscripts among those who inherit the collections of manuscripts, and they leave them without any kind of protection, and some of them even offer to people who can use for different ways in trade. So in conclusion, I attempted to, in my paper, I attempted to draw main lines of the history of manuscript cultures in Mozambique. However, due to the limitation of the national historiography and the study of Islam and Islamic culture, the argument was shortened to the northern Mozambique region, where I have been conducting my research. So the overlooking of Islam in the historiography of Mozambique is an inheritance of colonial impact and post-independent communist ideology. Its visible impact is the marginalization of Islamic culture, as I was trying to demonstrate. Ajami manuscript culture is thus a victim of how the national historiography was built since colonial and post-colonial periods. Asanteni sana, kashukuru wengine, thank you very much.
I believe you are from Cape Town. So, Sheikh Uwaisi studied in the blessed city of Medina al-Munawwara under many ulama, including the renowned Sheikh Sayyid Muhammad Alawi al-Maliki. He has ijaza from numerous renowned scholars from the Hijaz, Libya, Mauritania, Morocco, Mali, Syria, Senegal, and Egypt in the form of classical Islamic Muslim scholars, in a way. At ICOSA, now IPSA, he completed a bachelor's in Islamic theology, and he obtained a BA honors and an MA in religious studies from the University of Cape Town. He specialized in Hadith studies and Islamic history and translated Arabic texts into English. And since 2006, he lectured in Hadith, Sirah, and Muslim history at IPSA, where he also has been the head of the Department of Islamic Studies. He is also a part-time lecturer in Sirah and South African Muslim history at the Cape Town-based Medina Institute. So the turn is yours, Sheikh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu. My presentation is about 46 pages, but don't worry, I'm not going to read 46 pages to you. I'm going to try to summarize everything, inshallah. So my presentation is called the Handwritten Qur'ans of the Cape, an overview of a legacy. One aspect of Islamic heritage in the Cape that hasn't been covered comprehensively, though scholars have touched on it before me definitely, is the culture of transcribing the Qur'an. Now remember, Islam was not permitted to be practiced in the first 150 years of Islam at the Cape. And the heart and blood of any Muslim community is the presence of the actual Quran. Today, every home has a Quran. Once upon a time in Cape Town, there would be one Quran per an entire community. You would have, Simonstown would have just one Quran. The Awqaf would have one Quran. Woodstock would have one Quran. And that Quran was not your Saudi Arabian printed Quran that Hujjaj brought. It would be written by that Imam, often from memory, which he had learned in his homeland in Indonesia, where he grew up in the village, he memorized it. In those days, they used to learn how to read the Quran and write the Quran. And that's a science that's nearly died out today, except in some parts of the world. But those early scholars that came to Cape Town as exiles and political prisoners, even slaves, they had memorized the Quran in their homelands, learned how to write it, and they used that in the Cape to provide a handwritten Quran for the large Muslim community of slaves and exiles that was in the Cape. Unfortunately, from all those Qurans out there in the masses, we only know of one, which is the Quran written by Tuan Guru, preserved in the Owl Mosque in Dobe Street. But little beknown to most people is that there are many other handwritten Qurans in the Cape by many other Imams. Interestingly, Tuan Guru himself wrote 6 Qurans from memory. 2 of them are also still around, another 3 got lost over the years. In my paper, I cover 17 such Qurans in great detail, but I don't have time to go into all of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to move forward, inshallah. The first instance we have of a handwritten Quran in the Cape is by the Raja of Tambora. Tambora is an island in Indonesia. In fact, it's a kingdom on an island in Indonesia. The Raja revolted against the Dutch. You know the story. He was brought to Cape Town as an exile. He was put in the castle in a very terrible condition. A very important exile in the Cape at that time, who everybody knows, Tuan Yusuf of Makassar, intervened to the Dutch to say, this man cannot stay in a stable like this. So they moved him to a farm called Wergelegen in the Stellenbosch area. And there, around the year 1704 and 1705, the Raja of Tambora wrote an entire copy of the Quran. The Dutch traveler Francois Valentin actually remembers in his journal, travelogue, he actually remembers seeing the Raja write the Quran. He went to visit the governor, Adrian van der Stel, where the Raja was staying, and he saw him write the Quran. The Quran was the first one written in the Cape, After he wrote it, he gifted it to Governor Adriaan van der Stel as a gift, because the governor had been nice to him. We don't know what happened to that Quran. In recent times, however, in the 1990s, that's like 200 years later, in fact 300 years later, a claim was made by one of the scholars in the Strand that this Quran has been found. It was given to him by somebody from Holland, and he claimed that this is the Quran of the Raja of Tambora. I've examined that Quran. If we can go forward in the images here, it is quite an old Quran that is possessed by the Maulana in Strand. The names and details are all in my paper, so I'm not going to go into that. I've got 16 other Qurans to talk about. So when I examined that Quran, it is definitely quite old. It's about 250 years old. I can press it. Okay, great. So this is Tambora. This is the Quran from the Raja that is claimed to be the Quran of the Raja of Tambora. Unfortunately, you're not going to see it nicely here. It's a very old Quran. There's no signature, so we can't say for sure it is written by the Raja of Tambora. However, I noticed some Malay words in between. So it's definitely coming from the East Indies. The paper was checked, and it's established that the paper is at least 250 years old. So definitely, this is something that needs to be researched more. It's not the entire copy. It's only 5 juz. The next Qurans, of course, we have in the Cape are the ones of Tuan Guru. This is the one in the Owl Mosque. Pictures of the Quran in the Owl Mosque. Tuan Guru arrives here in 1780 from the Tidore Islands in Indonesia. Same story, he revolted against the Dutch. He was brought here, imprisoned for 12 years. He comes out around 1792, and he writes the 6 Qurans for the Muslim community in the Cape, which at that time was numbering about 2,000 or 3,000 people, which is a large community. This Quran is preserved in the Owl Mosque. Interestingly, it was discovered in the attic of the Owl Mosque in 1982. And it was verified that it's from Tuan Guru. It's preserved nicely there. There is another Quran, complete copy written by Tuan Guru, that is preserved by the Jassim family in Woodstock, who are related maternally to Tuan Guru. I had the honor of viewing that Quran. It's a complete Quran, and the handwriting is exactly the same as the one in Dobe Street. And the family, they confirmed through oral tradition that this is the Quran of their ancestor Tuan Guru. Again, the details are in my paper. I refer you to that. There is a third Quran, which is a pocket-sized one, also preserved in the Abdur Rauf family. They also claim it is by Tuan Guru. The Quran definitely is quite old. I dated it to around 1832. Now, that proves that it wasn't written by Tuan Guru. Tuan Guru passes away in 1807. This is in 1832, but the Tuan Guru family has it for generations. So it's not written by Tuan Guru, but either it's written by one of his children or grandchildren, or it's been preserved in the family. Nevertheless, it's a complete copy of the Quran, handwritten. I discussed some other details about this Quran in my paper. Then is the Quran that kind of inspired this entire research, the Quran written by Imam Rajab van Bugis. Imam Rajab also was an Indonesian exile from the island of the Bugis Islands in Indonesia. He wrote a complete copy of the Quran, also from memory. How do we know it's from memory? Is because there are errors. There are some ayats missing, which are completed on the sides by the Imam himself and sometimes by another handwriting. For me, that proves that it was written from memory. This Quran is preserved by the Harris family of Imam Yasin. It's a complete copy, and they've preserved it. It was written in 1803. The nice thing about this Quran is it's got a complete signature of the author at the end in Malay. So he writes in Malay that time, I finished writing this Quran on Thursday, Jamadus Sani, after Asr, and he gives the exact date and everything which corresponds to 1803. He calls Cape Town Nagri Kap, the city of Kap, Kampung Jali Jali in Malay, which means the fisherman's village, basically. So this is another Quran preserved, complete copy of the Quran by the Darcy family, by Professor Dr. Qasim Darcy. This is, they don't know who wrote it, but it's dated 1810. 1813. 1813, because there's a watermark with that date there. So it may have been written by 1815 as well. Dr. Darcy informed me that they actually originally knew who had written it, and there was a list with all the names. Somebody borrowed the Quran, they returned the Quran, but not the list. So they don't know who wrote it. 2 minutes left. Okay, 2 minutes left for 15 more. Yeah, so I'm going to go very fast then. This is a Quran possessed by the Rawut family. This is dated 1833. There is a date on it. So when I say the date, that means there is a date on it. Often in the Hijri date, which I converted to the Islamic date. This is a Quran possessed by the David family in Maitland, but it comes from their ancestors from the Eastern Cape. This is a complete copy of the Quran, beautiful copy, no date on it, but there's a watermark of 1850, so definitely very old. Then there is a Quran written by Imam Saban, Muhammad Saleh Saban of Simonstown. Imam Saban was born in 1853, died in 1928. This is the Quran that he wrote. Alhamdulillah, I managed to discover it with his descendants. It's also a beautiful copy. Then we have a Quran, the Kamedin family Quran, which is also quite old. It may be written by Imam Hasnuddin, who was mentioned earlier by Brother Abdul Dayan, because the family is connected to the Palm Tree Mosque. This Quran here is in the IRCICA Museum. It's dated 1850, handwritten in Southeast Asian style. There's another Quran in the IRCICA Museum. It's a pocket-sized Quran, also handwritten. Then we move forward. I'm coming now to the concluding parts. This is the one from the IRCICA Museum, yes. Some Qurans have been written recently in the Cape, and this is some new exciting developments. So that I know of 3 Qurans, complete copies written in the Cape in the last 20 years. One is this one by Buta Abbas Kluti. He wrote it next to the Afrikaans translation. Complete copy of the Quran transcribed by Buta Abbas Kluti. There's another written by Haji Salih Khalant of the Claremont area, student of Imam Abdullah Harun al-Shahid. He wrote a complete copy of the Quran. I've seen it by that beautiful copy. Then there is the Quran, 1 minute inshallah, then I'm done. Written by Buta Ahmad Fish, who is a great calligrapher of Cape Town. Amazingly, Buta Ahmad Fish started writing the Quran by the Qabr of Tuan Guru and concluded it by the Qabr of Tuan Guru. And he said that he was directly inspired by Tuan Guru. Buta Saleh Khalan said the same thing. He was inspired when he saw the Quran in Dobe Street Mosque. So these are connected to that legacy. This is a very beautiful one by Buta Ahmad Fish. It deserves to be published. Then we have the Quran in Utenaik. It's written by Imam Abdul Karim bin Imam Jabaruddin. Imam Abdul Karim, the son of Imam Jabaruddin, was born in 1817, died in 1900. So it's written in the mid-1800s. It's got a signature in Malay, which says Nagari Utenaik, Dalam, so on. It says that the village of Utenaik in the year, in the village of Utenaik. There's no year, but it's written in Malay. So you can see he was still speaking Malay. This is 1850s in the Utenaik. Complete copy of the Quran is preserved in the Masjidul Qudama in Utenaik. This is a copy that's preserved in Durban in the Sufi Saab Mosque. It's claimed to be 300 years old. Finally, the last thing I want to highlight.
What about the one before last? I have seen IRCICA logos on that.
This one?
Yeah, on the left.
This one, yeah. This is just an image I put here of a Quran that was perhaps the first Quran transcribed in the history of Islam. It is the Quran transcribed by Sayyidina Ali radiallahu an, immediately after the passing of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's preserved in Sana'a. Why I put it here is because it was restored completely by the Yemeni government and converted into a PDF as well, and it's beautifully restored. Because in my conclusion, my suggestion is, yeah, they printed it as you. Okay, so IRCICA actually printed this, fantastic. So I wait for my copy, inshallah. Inshallah. I would love to have that. I would love to have that. It's the entire Quran by Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anh. And this dispels the people who, some Orientalists, even current ones who claim that the Quran was invented by Muslims 100 years after the Prophet. You won't believe how some academics actually claim that. They couldn't believe that the Sahaba and the Prophet could produce anything as eloquent as the Quran. So that is, but this is the final part I want to mention. Currently, as we speak, the Jami'atul Qurra in Cape Town have commissioned Egyptian calligrapher Abdul Hamid Salam, who is residing in Cape Town, because the shart of my paper is it must be written in Cape Town, right? He's residing in Cape Town. He is compiling a complete copy of the Quran, a 15-liner, but every juz is going to start from the page. It's to be used, printed and published and used for our Huffaz, Hifz students in the Cape. He's completed 3 juz, and you can see that one page from it is beautiful. So this is currently happening. My suggestions to all the people who have these Qur'ans is just 3 things in 30 seconds each, inshallah. The first one is I call for restoration, first of all. These Qur'ans are crumbling, they've got holes in them, and they're not going to survive another 100 years. I have seen them, I've went through them, they need restoration. Restoration can be done, has been done. Next thing is digitization. They all need to be digitized and turned into PDFs. The third thing is preservation. They cannot be still there in those wardrobes, in those cupboards where I saw them, of the families. They need to be covered in the proper, kept in the proper environment where they don't disintegrate anymore. And this should happen with the cooperation of the families. In the end, I want to say that my interest in this is not because of any artistic interest. These Qur'ans are a testimony to how the pioneers of Islam in the Cape struggled to keep the deen alive under colonialism, slavery, jail, and oppression. It's a testimony to their iman. Shukran wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
I'm just reminding this. Just before you start, Mr. Mohammed Alexander, an independent researcher and heritage activist who is concerned about the systematic erosion of the Cape Muslims' culture and traditions that is challenged by Western alternatives. He is also worried about the dying Cape Muslim vernacular and the language culture. He thus embarked on a book project that captured the Cape Muslim vernacular for the younger Muslim English-speaking generation that cannot speak the Afrikaans-based African Muslim vernacular. He is also blogging, I believe, and he uses his blog to not only instill pride in Cape Muslim heritage, but to raise awareness about the sharp decline in Cape Muslims' cultural traditions.
My talk will be about the foreign loanwords in the Cape Muslim vernacular and the origins of the Cape Muslims Afrikaans pronunciation. You see, today across the South African language spectrum, there are various Afrikaans-speaking communities, and each community speaks a version of Afrikaans that differs from the other. And each of these communities pronounce the Afrikaans different from the other. And these communities are divided into 3 groups. The first group is what they call Oosgrens Afrikaans. Oosgrens Afrikaans is Boer Afrikaans, Standaard Afrikaans. And the second group of Afrikaans is what they call Oranje Rivier Afrikaans. Oranje Rivier Afrikaans is a Khoi Afrikaans. And under Khoi you get different versions of Khoi Afrikaans, many different versions of Khoi Afrikaans. And the last category is what they call Kaapse Afrikaans. Kaapse Afrikaans in English, of course, is Cape Town Afrikaans. Now, the Cape Muslims, they speak 2 versions of Afrikaans. They speak both Kaapse and they speak both Cape Muslim Afrikaans. They speak Kaapse when they speak to a non-Cape Muslim, but they speak Cape Muslim Afrikaans when they speak to a Muslim, because the difference between Cape Muslim Afrikaans and Kaapse is that there are so many foreign loanwords in the Cape Muslim Afrikaans and unique cultural terms used in Cape Muslim Afrikaans. The non-Cape Muslim Kaapse speaker doesn't know or understand the meaning of these Cape Muslim Afrikaans. And the reason why I mentioned all these different versions of Afrikaans, there was a time when people said that Afrikaans is a language of the oppressor. And with this we can see Afrikaans is not one language, but there are many different versions of Afrikaans. But to understand exactly where Cape Muslim Afrikaans fits into all these different versions of Afrikaans, we're going to have to go back to the late 1800s. And at the time, the Dutch language was only spoken by the upper class, the elite Afrikaners, of course, descendants of the European colonists. Under the upper class, the more elite, the more educated, spoke the Dutch language. In fact, Dutch language was a status language. But the great majority of people were uneducated and they couldn't speak the Dutch language. And this included many Afrikaners who couldn't speak. And the fact that so many Afrikaners couldn't speak the Dutch language was not acceptable to a group of Afrikaan nationalists. And this group was known as the Genootskap van Regte Afrikaners. In English, Association of Real Afrikaners. So, on the 14th of August, 1875, this group got together somewhere in one of the houses, one of the members in Paarl, to decide on this breakaway language for their people. And then the following year, the 15th of January, 1876, they published their first newspaper. And this newspaper was known as the Afrikaanse Patriot. But if you look at those newspaper, you see they still use the old Afrikaans with the old Afrikaans spellings. And then eventually, in 1917, they published their first Afrikaans grammar and spelling rules. And with this, they simplified the Dutch language and they simplified the spelling. And in the process, they moved further away from the Dutch language with the simplified spelling. And with the new spelling, the pronunciation of the Dutch language also differs. And now, oh my word. So now we come back to Cape Moose Afrikaans. Cape Moose Afrikaans, oh yes, to come back to this, of course, and then eventually on the 1925, this version of Afrikaans was then accepted as an official language, and it was this version of Afrikaans that was taught in schools to everyone, both European as well as non-European. And of course, this version of Afrikaans was, of course, the end product of this initial Afrikaner nationalist movement. And something worth noting about this version of Afrikaans is that the language or the words used by non-Europeans were deliberately excluded in this new version of Afrikaans. And now we come back to Cape Moose Afrikaans. Cape Moose Afrikaans, on the other hand, is the evolved first Afrikaans, the Afrikaans from which this breakaway Afrikaans was derived. This is the evolved first Afrikaans, and this evolved first Afrikaans was influenced by this breakaway Afrikaans language because this breakaway Afrikaans was taught in schools to everyone. But it was only influenced in spelling but not in pronunciation. And this, and of course, when one look at the earlier Arabic Afrikaans texts, it appears that those earlier Malays pronounced their Afrikaans the way the letters and words were pronounced in the Malay language. And it is this pronunciation that the Cape Muslims inherited and used to this day. A few examples, for instance, you get the letter J. In the Malay language, the letter J is pronounced as J, with the Arabic Jim. And the new breakaway language, Afrikaans language, the letter J is pronounced like an English Y, yeah. In the Malay language, you get, for instance, a word like Jalang, you can word J, Arabic Jim. You get a word like Japan. In standard Afrikaans, you can hear yeah, Japan, right with the English Y. Yeah, Japan, and Jalan. Cape Muslim pronounce this Japan as Japan, the way that J is pronounced in the Malay language, Japan. You get an Afrikaans word like yay, spelled J-Y, and pronounced yay. Cape Muslim pronounce the J in this word here is a J, the way that J is pronounced in the Malay language, and it pronounces as J. J. Of course, many other words, of course, you get the word like Afrikaans word, you get the words like yes, and they pronounce it as jas. You get the word like verja, and they pronounce verja. Jog, and they pronounce a york, and jog. But you can see. Another thing, another observation is that you find that in the Malay language, the letter C is pronounced as CH. So CI is pronounced as chi. Right? Two common words in the Malay language as well as the Afrikaans language are the words bun, chi, ka, chi. In the new Indonesian language, it is spelled B-U-N-C-I. Because the C is pronounced as C-H, C-I is pronounced as chi. And these words are spelled B-U-N-C-I but pronounced bun, chi, ka, chi. Now this C-I, the new breakaway Afrikaans pronounces ki, buen, ki, kar, ki. But it is written T-J-I-E, but pronounced ki. Cape Muslims pronounce all other words ending in T-J-I-E as chi, wanchi, kachi, bichi, vanchi. Standard Afrikaans spell it with T-J-I-E, but pronounces boinki, vanki, sterki, bikki. Another observation is that when you look at those earlier Afrikaans texts, you see many words written as in this breakaway language, as double O was written as OE. In fact, the very first word I picked up in those Arabic Afrikaans texts was the word soos. In standard Afrikaans, it is pronounced soos. There's many other words, of course, you get like boom and boom and loop and loop. And to this day, they pronounce it like this. And also many other words you see in the new breakaway Afrikaans language, words spelled with double E. You must remember when they changed their spelling, it also affected the pronunciation of words. While the Cape Muslims, that was derived from this, they stuck to their pronunciation. In other words, double E, like Viet, then the New Afrikaans pronounced Viet or Vergeet and Vergiet and so on. But with this, we can see the way Cape Muslims pronounce their Afrikaans is the inherited version. They inherited from their Malay forebears. But this is a funny thing. And they've been using their pronunciation over and above this later created standard Afrikaans. And today, they have made us believe over the years that this version of Afrikaans used by Cape Muslims is a wrongly pronounced version of this much later created standard Afrikaans. Those the spelling and grammar rules written by this breakaway Afrikaans language was only published in 1917. These Arabic Afrikaans texts were written long before 1917. So it's impossible that this can be a wrongly pronounced version of this much later created standard Afrikaans language. The opposite might be true, that standard Afrikaans is a wrongly pronounced version of the original Afrikaans. And they made us believe the other way is the other way around. But it's not only these unique pronunciation that makes Cape Muslim Afrikaans different from other versions of Afrikaans, it's also the many foreign loanwords. You see, especially Malay loanwords and Arabic loanwords, or at least so it seems. But before those early Malays were brought to the Cape, many foreign loanwords crept into their language. For instance, there are Chinese words, there are Hindu words, there are Malay words, there are Tamil words, there are Sanskrit words, there are Portuguese words, there are Dutch loanwords, there are Arabic loanwords, Persian loanwords. There are many other words from other languages spoken in the Malay archipelago, where it's Makassarese, Sudanese, Buganese, and Javanese, you name it. And when they were brought here, they come with all those foreign loanwords in their vernacular, and all those foreign words became part of the Cape Muslim vernacular. And today, locally, it is just seen as Malay words. But the reality, it is much more than Malay words. But due to these foreign loanwords in the Cape Muslim vernacular, the Cape Muslim vernacular is not always understandable to non-Cape Muslims because of all these foreign loanwords. In the book that was published recently, the Dictionary of Loanwords in the Cape Muslim vernacular, I give an example of a conversation between two Cape Muslims just to show how different Cape Muslim Afrikaans is compared to standard Afrikaans. And it goes something like, I'll just give the first few lines, the first 4 lines, and it goes something like this. So I met a friend of mine and asked him to attend a function with me, and he declined the invitation, saying, nee man, ek sal ek gaan nie, ek gaan nou gaan sit toe, ons aan Jesus se 100 dae. Hy moet nou in die poase gaan meneer. Nog al ons so wag toe man. Maar nog al oggend net na Leila toe kader en ek klag gesouer, die bange bilal, ek neem op das en maak sy sala en ons is 'n Jood kruise asal. This conversation ends with, ek wil nie gelaaf maak en fitna nie, maar gaan dit se kinders. Nou gaan ek daar aan. With this, we can see how different Cape Muslim Afrikaans is. You know, one day, someone from the build, he took this and he had to translate this for his viewers, Afrikaans viewers, because imagine this is Afrikaans, but they had to translate this for his viewers to understand this version of Afrikaans. But it's not only all these unique pronunciation, all these foreign loanwords that make Cape Muslim Afrikaans different from other versions of Afrikaans. It's a completely different language culture. For example, there are certain Afrikaans idiomatic expressions used and understood exclusively by Cape Muslims. For example, we say, wanneer gaan jy begin die kop op die grond sit, wanneer gaan jy begin die voete nat maak, wanneer jy neet gemaak het op die berg, jy eet agter die bak, ek moet nog my skuld betaal, ek moet nog klag gaan maak. No, Fred, only the Cape Muslims know the true meaning behind these Afrikaans idiomatic. No other Afrikaans-speaking communities uses these Afrikaans idiomatic expressions or understand. As op die berg, nothing to do with the mountain, ek moet nog my skuld betaal. Niks te doen met geld. Oh, okay, fine. Okay, maar for that, is halfway through. Okay, I'll just end off with one thing. I have so much to say still for it, but I'll just end off with one thing. One thing I'd like everyone to remember is that this version of Afrikaans is not a wrongly pronounced version of the later created Afrikaans language. This version of Afrikaans we inherited from our Malay forebears, and is part of us. It is part of our heritage. And Afrikaans should always be our first language because this is our ancestral language. We inherited this from our Malay forebears, and Cape Muslim contributed so greatly to the creation of the Afrikaans language that we should see it as ours, and Afrikaans should always be our first language. And with that, I'd like to say, Baie Tramakasi, the way we say it in the Cape Muslim vernacular equivalent to. Thank you.
The next turn is Dr. Mohammed Fadil Arnold with the topic Building the Self-Worth of the Cape Muslim and Beyond, the Case of Awqafs. Let me just shortly introduce you to the audience. Mohammed Fadil Arnold is a passionate educator who has a BA from UWC and another PhD degree from Beijing University of Chinese Medicine based in Cape Town. He pioneered the Quran-based holistic leisure learning known as HLL in 1990 and has been HLL University Director. Along with that, he has been the Director of Islamic Center for Research and Activity, ICRA. He also lectured in Quranic methodology at MJC's Darul Arkam. He authored, among others, Asrakal, Sexual Courtesy in Islam with Dr. Pandi, Holistic Preparatory Program, Senior Holistic Learning, Islam's Inherent Artistry, Awqafs, The Language of Colonial Resistance, and edited Origin of Cape Islam-Oriented Schools, 1860 to 1980, by Dr. M.T. Ajam. Apart from having acted as moderator at sites Mocha Arab Script, Islamic Calligraphy, from a local perspective on 20 May 2021, he was also a presenter at several conferences. Now, we are waiting for you for another talk at another conference. Yeah, please.
I wrote a book, Awqafs, The Language of Colonial Resistance, because I find that it's difficult to understand that we have a lone language. I also, as an Afrikaans student, right up to my final year as a teacher, realized that Afrikaans is not a language at all. I switched to English because 90% of the words in my course on Pedagogic 3 was actually Anglicism. So I would ask people, please don't say it's Arabic Afrikaans, because Afrikaans is so loaned, it's not funny, including English. So if we look at our own language, it's actually creative. So I've written the back of this book, and maybe you can just see the seriousness of us being able to own our own language. This book aims to dispel the notion that the language of Muslims of the Awqaf is Creole, Strataal, loan language, colloquial, pastor, scholartaal, etc. As a descendants of the colonialists, the illegal enfranchised class, through deliberate marginalization of the masses, wish to make us believe that they, the Europeans or the whites, are the pure race, and all non-Europeans or non-whites are simply are lesser beings. By simply playing with terminology, a culture of the academic cult, which disregards creative work as non-academic and rejects papers not written in their vernacular. Yes, they also have a vernacular, which is a mixed dialect, as most modern languages are. We are all descendants from Prophet Adam alayhi salam and Sayyidina Hawa as our common ancestral parents. Our languages integrate naturally. We speak English simply because the British colonized our countries and established their language through forced political policies to apex their culture. They also systematically stole from other nations and then created legal copyright to create international protocol, Eurocentric dominance, to protect the stolen property and innovations of other nations. They even anglicized non-white scientists' names. It is with this truth that this book appeals to all, to be honest and realize that all languages are created by the one and only Allah, the Almighty, and that Quranic Arabic is the only pure language, and it gives life and depth to any other language. Now, this is a serious statement I'm making, because one must realize the colonialists did not leave the countries until they left their educational system, their political system, their business system, and Only after they have set that in and their banking system did they leave the country, because they know that the people who stay behind will secure the interest. Now I want to read to you a piece from Professor Ajam's paper. Professor Ajam, Muhammad Ajam, by the way, I mustn't forget, I'm standing in front of my ustad who taught me Arabic. Please give him a big hand. Without him, I would not have been able to stand here. May Allah grant him all the barakah, and his brother-in-law, Professor Yasin Muhammad. I learned from them when I couldn't even read an Arabic script, because I couldn't understand. I lifted this alif wa e. So I'm grateful forever. May Allah grant you all the barakah, inshallah. So I want to quote to you what comes out of Dr. Ajam's thesis. He says, an influence class, the modernized Cape Muslims who accepted the colonial educational protocol became kind of Muslims the British of those days created in all their other colonies, but not in the old Cape. I quote from Dr. Ajam's thesis. They wanted an influential class of Muslims that will be culturally British or Western and morally Muslim for continuance of the Western culture over time. This would reduce anti-colonial uprisings due to internal Westernized Muslims class reluctance. They didn't do it to us because they couldn't understand our language. We wrote in Arabic script, we spoke a language they couldn't do, and we didn't read their language. So they didn't bother because we were too small. They thought we were not an influential group of people. So there are different versions of the history of the Cape. So much so that Dr. Ali Adam has just contracted me to write a real Cape Muslim history. On Friday, last Friday, we signed the contract. He wants me to really dig into the true Muslim history. I said, Maulana, I'm 68 years old. You want me to do this? He says, I'm 80. He says, there's nog 'n klomp. You just start the research and say Bismillah. So within the Awqafs, I call it Awqafs because we actually, did I leave the other one? I call it Awqafs because most of the people that settled in Cape Town came to Awqaf because the port is there. Most of the ulama that arrived, they arrived there. And the imams had a tremendous influence on the way we speak. I'll give you an example. The imam would say, brothers and sisters. Afterwards, we all would hear brother in societies and in organizations with brother so-and-so, etc. The scholar also said afterward, by bro. And now the white young people are saying, bruh. So the imams had a tremendous influence. So if I look at our language, if you look at the language of the Muslims, then it has the following in it. It's a creative language. It shortens words. It mixes languages. It extends some words. It adds syllables. It replaces letters. It lengthens certain sounds. It joins certain words. Right? And if one looks at that, it's actually some of the Tajweed rules. It's some of the Arabic Tajweed rules in order to flow and develop a kind of an ease for communication. So if you look at the language that was created, which I call Awqafs, it's warm, it's a real language, it considers the listener, it's respectful, it's relaxing, it's harmonious, it's reflective, it's humble, it's deep, it lengthens the heart, it's heartwarming, it's a tongue-in-cheek kind of approach, it's non-confrontational, it's unifying, it is social, and it's non-discriminatory, and it's very loving. So at the moment, the Boer are coming to the Boer Cup to ask us about our language because Afrikaans is dying. The moment it will not be presented at school, it will actually die. Now they're using our people's language to put it into their genres and actually make a fool out of our people and our deen through Barakat, District 6, and all of these things that are coming on the air now, putting our international foreground with our people and our language and our particular mosque in the background, to discredit our people, and that because this is not a standard language. Now, if one asks Noam Chomsky if there's something like a standard language, he tells you it's a myth. In actual fact, the first thing they do to break a society is to break their language, or to make a fool out of them, to make a fool out of their own language, so that they can adopt the language of the oppressor. This is a serious thing. So as much as we feel warm about our language, it's not a joke. It's the way we express ourselves. And they find difficulty in expressing themselves because they standardize the language for examination purposes. And the examination purposes is to say the masses of people must write in their language, so most of them will fail and they will take the top positions. So if you look at the educational infrastructure, it is designed to break the self-esteem of our people. And that is very difficult for us to actually develop ourselves on a decent manner because we will be split in terms of thinking about our own language. And I didn't know it went so fast, that my time is up so quickly. But I hope I've left something. And may I just add on to this, please, that if one looks at the Burqa people, they should feel safe because the Mardekas were the first Muslims that came to Cape Town in 1658. They were free people that came to build the Burqa houses. Very little is written about them. The push for that we are the slave descendants is too much. 1794, and most of our mosques were built in 1800s. So how is it possible that we were slaves? Because slaves were not allowed to have their own religion, their own name. They couldn't have schools, etc. They were stripped of their identity. That couldn't have been Burqa people. So the evidence is right in our face, but we're not allowing it because we are following a genre, a kind of a thinking that the Western world has given us, and we build our thesis on it. So may Allah guide us, inshallah, because we need to know. Ons moet ons openmaak, inshallah. Shukran to you.
We are pressing them on to finish in just 10 minutes. But maybe we can cover up with the questions and answers. So we have, I think, 10 minutes more. Or maybe we can make it 15, I don't know. 10. Yeah. Can we get the mic? Yeah. One from here, I see, yeah. Okay. Let's start from that side.
Assalamu alaikum. Dr. Chapani, I just want to know, did you know about the Ajami conference that was held by UCT some years back? And also Dr. Fakhruddin Owaisi, there has been calls from Southeast Asia to actually do the things that you were talking about, but nobody came forward. I just need to know, have you received the message from there? Shukran.
Thank you so much for the question. Though I don't know which one you refer. I was in a UCT in a workshop. I think it was a workshop on Ajami manuscripts, on manuscripts, let's say, because there were people dealing with Ajami manuscripts and the so-called Islamic manuscripts, which are not Ajami, in Arabic language, I mean, and there were people dealing with Chinese manuscripts. And it was in 2016. Is that one? Oh yeah, I was there. I was there. but maybe I couldn't get the last part of your question. No. There were no proceedings, if I remember. Yeah, there were no proceedings. Yeah. Thank you so much. But about Mozambican Nigerian manuscripts, I wrote my MA thesis on chancellery manuscripts, Ajami chancellery manuscripts from Mozambique. There are also a paper with Professor Liazad Bonad. She also has some papers on it, and I also wrote recently my PhD thesis on Tenzi literature in northern Mozambique, also Ajami. So we're trying to bring it up. Thank you so much.
You gave the mic first,
Assalamu
and
alaikum.
then secondly to you. Yeah.
Yes, my name Salim Saidu from the previous panel. Perhaps before I get maybe a suggestion or question to Sheikh Uwais, I wish Dr. Samet was my moderator. He's been very considerate with time. So I would have put on my recommendation, which is what I'm maybe putting forward to Sheikh Uwais. If perhaps you have thought about maybe raising awareness towards a collection drive of the archives of such, perhaps the Qurans, because I have also suggested to some of the families in Botswana, we have so much archives within the community of the olden documents that the younger generation sees as perhaps dirty papers and what they throw them away. Whereas now, especially with the COVID, we've lost a lot of elders who knew and understood the value of the archives that they have in the cupboards and the big trunks. So have you thought of maybe doing a collection drive with regards to the manuscripts that are there? Jazakumullah khairan, barakallahu feekum.
Thank you. First of all, to Dr. Muhammad Hartley, yes, indeed, I do feel that we need to cooperate. In fact, we need to reach out more to Indonesia as well as Malaysia to assist us in the process of the restoration and preservation of these Qurans, because these things need funding. Restoration is a very expensive job, to be honest. Digitization is a bit easier and cheaper. But for that funding, I think we should definitely approach Indonesia and Malaysia, because many of those who wrote these Qurans directly come from Indonesia. So, and the Indonesians, even recently there was a conference on Sheikh Yusuf and Tuan Guru. They are definitely interested in the Indonesian heritage in Cape Town. So that's a liaison that we should definitely pursue. With regards to your question, sir, yes, on a personal level, I have actually started a campaign like that to collect manuscripts. It's nothing official and formal, it's a personal thing. Over the years, I've collected myself quite a few manuscripts. If you come to my office at IPSA, you're welcome anytime. I've got a large number of such manuscripts. People come to me with cartons. They say, Sheikh, this was my grandfather or father or the Imam. He left it, and we really don't read Arabic. We need space, in that room. We want to get rid of this. We nearly threw it away. But we heard about your interest and we bring it to you. And I go through that, and books come out that are 100 years old, 200 years old, handwritten. I've got books from the time of Tuan Guru's children, Abu Bakr Effendi. I've got original copies of books by Sheikh Abu Bakr Effendi, and so many other things. So definitely on a personal level, I'm doing this, but I think we should now escalate it to a formal, official campaign in the entire Muslim community to collect or at least catalog these manuscripts, the Quranic ones that I talk about, and then general manuscripts, what they call the kitabs. There have people who have written about it. There's Sarah Japi who wrote about that, and others. The kitab culture in Cape Town, they were called kitabs. Although in Arabic, kitab is any book, but in Cape Town, the Cape Malay lingo Dr. Muhammad spoke about, if they wrote a religious text in Arabic or Malay or Arabic African, that was called the kitab, with a P in the end. Right? So the kitabs, many families have them, and if we do work together nicely, we could get a very large collection of them. The IRCICA Museum actually also has a large collection of them as well. Shukran.
And I'm looking at the audience here, majority of the older generation. There's not many youth here. So my question is, how can we try and emphasize that our language, also Kaapse style Afrikaans, is basically a language of resilience, as Buddha Muhammad Alexander indicated, that it's basically our style, which the colonialists basically drew from, and it's not the other way around. So how can we make sure that we keep on this legacy of our style, Kaapse style Afrikaans going on? Because many of the youth in general, if you start off, for example, the old imams, they would say, ons bedank vir Allah Ta'ala, vir die dien van Islam, and alle salawat and salams, so ons geliefde Rasul. They don't like that. They like the new styles, how the scholars are speaking. So how can we preserve our style Afrikaans and not make it seem that it's only the language of the old Buddhas that used to wear the rooi kofia or the kwas like Sheikh Uwais is wearing now? That it's not a language of the old Buddhas and the old Titis, but it's actually our language because it's a language of resilience. How can we do this to ensure that we preserve our language and also carry on a good legacy for all the youth to come in future, specifically for us youth? Shukran and maaf, baie terima kasih. Not shukran, baie terima kasih.
Sorry. Okay. My question links to that. During the launch of my book, someone suggested that we must get, especially, and apart from that, we also have a problem with Arabization or our language, because nowadays it's not it's a winner van so'n putte janaza and makbara and oudheid gehoor van kifait and van kubus and van all these words are now being replaced with Arabic words, and that's a first problem. But someone mentioned that one of the first things we can start with getting the radio stations to use all these terms again, instead of saying so-and-so put a passed on and the janaza will be so-and-so and the makbara will be so. You say again like in the olden time, you say so put it gamaneel, die kifait gaan wees so-and-so tyd weer and by so-and-so kubus, instead of the Arabic words, whatever. One of the things. And also someone mentioned also that you must try using, I think is what Professor Muhammad Harun or Ibrahim Rodo mentioned, that we must have it in school books and playbooks and for the children, because now the last remaining speakers of this vernacular appears to be over 50 years of age. And if they should pass on, so will this vernacular. Because the younger generation, we switched to English now. It was a language shift during the 1980s. The result of this, our younger generation do not even understand the meaning of the many Malay words. Some of them use the Arabic word, but the Malay words, and if these 50 years older, then it's going to die out, so this Malay language. So the only way to get this to remain, the book that I wrote, this was the last ditch attempt to try and at least preserve it. And this will be significant because over the years I was able to identify about 500 foreign loanwords in the Cape Town vernacular, as well as the language culture. And all this has now been captured, and this is significant. It will be more significant 2 generations from now.
I think the speakers brings out the fact that language is not static. Number one, language moves all the time. So what's interesting is, maybe Brother Muhammad Alexander, is where does Afrikaans now fit into this thing? Because we see there's a huge activities to bring Afrikaans back, which is beyond the Cape Muslim Afrikaans. And I'm not sure how we see that fit into one another as well. And then I think you answered the issue of the influence of Arabic on the latest language. But very interesting, just to note, is that how they control the language or structure the language in order to control you. And that I think Dr. Arnold mentioned that. But the issue is that even if we look at Wikipedia, if you look at Wikipedia, we just think Wikipedia is something you upload, anybody can upload and you can just put in anything in there. Go look at the rules of Wikipedia and you see the same controls that's in place in order to control you, how you put language on Wikipedia. So the colonialist control of language is continuing with the virtual way of looking at language and so on. So just something very interesting, because Professor Dumet from the University of Cape Town has written an excellent paper on how Wikipedia is now controlling language with a dominance from the West to control the language usage on Wikipedia. Just something I thought I'll mention. Thank you. But maybe Afrikaans, we'd like to see where that fits in the modern dealings of the language. Because it seems it goes beyond the Muslims.
I think one must allow all those kind of differences, not to try and control them as well. But I think we need to continue in our own light. This book that I wrote I wrote it in Afrikaans, in our own language, and in English. Plus I have a list of 700 of words which we don't use anymore. So this book is available. You can just WhatsApp me if you want to order one. But this would be like putting it down in terms of a written language with Afrikaans, pure, what you call like standardized Afrikaans and standardized English. And also bringing some of the words that we've lost in our, I must comment here on this. There were two academics speaking to each other, two Muslims, and they were using our language. And I said to her, Ayabdia de Costa, you know Ayabdia de Costa? She's 96. I said to her, I saw these two professors speaking in our language so comfortably. So she said, ja, hulle is moeg van answer.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I mean, all very fascinating and interesting panels, as you have just heard. And it's so difficult, I think, on our side, from Awqaf and IRCICA and UWC, so difficult to basically cause you to cut off when you're really heating up and sharing your ideas. But be that as it may, hopefully we'll have all the papers and you can basically read them.